And now it's my honor and pleasure to introduce a friend and someone who has spoken at many Praxis events and conferences in the past, and I don't even know how far back we go, but we've been in Dubrovnik, we've been in Asilomar, we've been in Sonoma, so he's spoken at several conferences that we've done in the past, and as probably most of you know, he's a co-founder and board chair of Yes Magazine, and there are issues out there for all of us. Many of you are how many of you are subscribers to Yes? Look at this. Look at this. This is great. So everyone should be. This is the magazine of the positive futures, and I think, you know, reading about what people are doing around the country and around the world that is where we want to go is inspiring, and it gives us more hope that what we're working on is really possible. So David is also co-chair of the New Economy Working Group, founder and president of the Living Economies Forum, and a former board member of the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, or BALE. I think you were one of the co-founders, yes, one of the founders as well. And an associate of the International Forum on Globalization. He earned MBA and PhD degrees from Stanford University and has been on the faculty of Harvard University Graduate School of Business. In the 1970s, David left academia and moved to Southwest Asia, where he served as a Ford Foundation project specialist and later as an Asia Regional Advisor on Development Management for USAID, which we kind of always hiss at a little bit, but he's not there anymore. Disillusioned with official aid programs, he shifted his work to Asian non-government organizations. He's the author of many of the books that they have at the bookstore out here: Agenda for a New Economy, When Corporations Rule the World, The Great Turning, and the Post-Corporate World, and Life After Capitalism. So these are all great titles and great books. I've read them all, and I recommend them all, and you can get them at the bookstore. And I think you might be able to sign books afterwards tonight, yes? Okay, great. So please welcome David Korten.
Well, it's always great to get back to the Bay Area, and it's really been a wonderful experience, again, joining another Praxis Peace conference, because over time, so many of us have become good friends and colleagues, and of course it's an extraordinary thrill when Georgia asks how many Yes subscribers we have, and everybody raises your hand, so I feel very much at home. Georgia, in her framing invitation to this conference, spoke of the cultural resistance to the deep transformation that we must now navigate as a species. She called us to frame a cultural intervention grounded in a new story and a vision of possibility. Many of you have echoed this theme in your presentations and in our conversations here. I was struck that this morning Andy Kimbrell specifically ended his presentation echoing the need for a new story. Actually, the story that we need, the new story, is an extension of a very old story. Ancient roots, indigenous roots, but with some new context and new content. So tonight, I am going to share my reflections on what I consider to be a simple, self-evident, but largely forgotten truth. And this is key, because this truth, I truly believe, lives in the human heart. We must simply bring it to the fore. We humans are living beings, born of a living earth, who live by our stories. And that's why we're in deep trouble. We have got our story terribly wrong. If we're to have a future, we must get it right. And if we get it right, that will change everything. In March 2012, I had the privilege of being a guest at a small gathering of indigenous environmental leaders. It was an international gathering. It was at the Pocantico Retreat Center, which is the old Rockefeller family estate. Very interesting setting. They were there to discuss, to prepare for their interventions in what then was the upcoming Rio Plus 20 conference, the Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit. They had observed that in preparatory meetings for that conference, Wall Street interests had said, yes, we must save nature. And if we're going to save her, we have to put a price on her, so we'll make her valuable. Well, within the context of our established framing story, that seems to make perfect sense. But they went on to observe that there's a familiar pattern there. First price, then privatize, then commodify, then securitize, and then profit from another speculative frenzy. So maybe it's not such a great idea. The indigenous position was clear and it was uncompromising. Earth is our sacred mother. She is the source of our birth and our nurture. Her care is a sacred responsibility of all humanity. She is beyond price, and she is not for sale, and her rights must come before all other rights. Wow. Then midway through the deliberations, Karmit Satin, he is the secretary, the head of the Bhutan Gross National Happiness Commission. I'm sure you're all familiar with Bhutan and their happiness indicators. He gave a brief presentation on the Bhutan experience, and he ended with 3 words. Time is life. I was stunned. My dad raised me on a different story. He regularly said, time is money. Your value as a person will be determined by what someone's willing to pay you. As an undergraduate, I took a full course on how to calculate the time value of money. And then I went to business school, and most every course we took, we had to do calculations about the time value of money. So there we are. Time is life, or time is money. 6 words that frame the contrast between 2 fundamentally cultural orientations, 2 fundamentally different stories about what we most value, what is most valuable, what is most sacred. That's what I'm going to talk about. That gathering at Pocantico took me back to memories of the impact of reading Thomas Berry, which Andy Kimbrell also noted, that many of us here have been influenced by Thomas. It also took me back to conversations with Bill and Lynn Twist and the work of Pocantico and what they've been learning from the indigenous peoples of South America about the time when the indigenous people would come forward to share their story that humanity had forgotten and as a result had lost its way. So I began this inquiry, a deeper inquiry into our human story and its impact on our current situation, which resulted ultimately in Change the Story, Change the Future, which will be my next book coming out in February. Now I want to pause for just a moment. My wife, Fran Korten, life partner and publisher of Yes Magazine, is going to circulate a sign-up sheet both for the Living Economies Forum and for Yes Magazine. But particularly if you check the Living Economies Forum, you will will send you notices of future discussions and events around the theme of finding our story as a movement and bringing it to the fore of public consciousness. Now, I'm sure you are all familiar with what I call the sacred money and market story. I'm going to go through the essential elements just so we get them all together and think about, if the story is true, what does it tell us about ourselves? How do we see it playing out in the ways in which we organize ourselves as a global civilization? Time is money. Money is wealth. Making money creates wealth. And it is a defining purpose of each individual, business, and the economy. Those who make money are society's wealth creators. Their affluent lifestyles are their fair and just reward for their effort and their contribution to us all. Material consumption is the path to happiness. Poverty is a consequence of laziness. We humans are by nature individualistic competitors, and this is a blessing because the invisible hand of the free market channels our individual and corporate competitive drive for financial gain to choices that maximize economic growth and thereby the wealth and well-being of all. Corporations are just aggregations of the talents and interests of people working together to provide the essential jobs, the goods, the services that create a better wealth for all. A corporation's profits are the measure of its social contribution. As corporations create wealth, governments consume it. So the function of government should be limited to assuring the common defense, securing property rights, and enforcing contracts. Economic inequality and environmental damage are a regrettable but necessary and avoidable cost of the economic growth that is essential to eliminate poverty and to drive the technological innovation needed to free us from our cruel dependence on nature. So, now is there anyone here that's never heard this story before? I don't see any hands. I think we've all heard it. You've never heard it? Oh. Yeah. Yeah, we rarely put all the elements together, and we rarely recognize that it is part of an actually coherent story that frames our every political agenda, most of our public conversations. Now, we're also not supposed to notice that every single assertion in this story is false. Every single assertion is false. Though it is taught in economics courses in our most prestigious universities as objective science, it is bad ethics, it is bad science, and it's actually bad economics. It is a story fabricated by corporate think tanks, PR professionals, and economists to put a pretty face on capitalism and gain and maintain our acceptance of a capitalist suicide economy that is literally killing us. So what is capitalism? Well, in the simplest literal terms, it means rule by the owners of capital. Now, if that were this cooperative, shared, we're all owners, that might be a good thing. But more specifically, what it truly refers to, and what it has referred to since the term capitalism was coined, is an economic system in which the few monopolize control of society's productive resources to extract unearned monopoly profits at the expense of the many. And the favored institutional instrument to achieve this control is the publicly traded limited liability corporation. The sacred money and market story is constantly repeated by corporate media. It frames every news report and political debate, and it legitimates a legal system that gives corporations more rights than people and gives nature no rights at all. In one of his many insightful homilies, Pope Francis observed that money is not itself evil. It is the idolatry of money that is evil, the worship of money as a false god. That is the evil. And that's so literally the nature of our economy and our modern society. Seduced by the sacred money and market story, we become a global society of money worshippers. The making of money has become our life's purpose, shopping a civic duty, financial markets our moral compass, the institutions of finance our temples, and economists the priests who provide us with absolution for our personal and collective sins against life. Choosing money over life, we acquiesce to rule by global financial markets gamed by high-speed computers. We give ourselves in indentured servitude to money-seeking corporate robots that reduce people and nature to commodities for sale and operate as autonomous entities beyond human control. Here's a thing that I find particularly interesting, but it's also particularly alarming in many ways. The CEOs and billionaire financiers who appear to be in charge are best understood as merely well-compensated servants of a system that favors them with lavish rewards, but which they are individually powerless to redirect to the service of life. Just find a CEO of a publicly traded corporation that stands up and say, we shouldn't be maximizing profit, we should be maximizing service to the community and just getting a fair profit, and see how long that person stays in their job. Even though we may sense that the story is bogus, it carries the day in political debates and defines our common future because it is the only story we hear in the public discourse. Unlike the corporate interests that organize around a well-defined story, we who struggle in the cause of life, justice, sustainability, peace, and democracy campaign and organize around individual issues, often defined by identity politics. And in so doing, we both concede the framing story and we play into the divide and conquer strategy of elite politics. To the extent we argue our case within a larger story frame, we generally do so within the established money and market story frame. For example, rather than argue that greater equality is essential to create healthy societies, and that in itself is reason enough for equality, we instead argue that greater equality would be better for economic growth. Now, when we do that, we tend to reinforce the story that we must ultimately discredit and replace. And we may win a temporary victory for life, but we lose the future to money. A new story, a sacred life and living earth story is emerging as people mobilize to rebuild their lives and their communities around values of caring and sharing for one another and nature. So here is the sacred life and living earth story as I see the elements beginning to come together. We humans are living beings born of and nurtured by a living earth. Real wealth is living wealth. Time is life. Money is just a number useful as a medium of exchange in well-regulated markets. It is not itself wealth, it's an accounting entry, it's a claim against real wealth. Life exists only in community. We humans are creatures of conscience. We survive and prosper only as members of a living earth community. And the prime task of any living community is to maintain the conditions essential to the life of its members. We all do best when we all do well in a world that works for all. Again, just self-evident truths. Truths that are supported by indigenous wisdom, by religious insight, in fact, by science, and by the insights of the mystics and our daily experience. Other elements of the story. A connection to nature and community is essential to our physical and mental health and well-being. It is indeed our human nature, as science has confirmed, to care and to share for the benefit of all. When we see expressions of extreme individualistic greed, ruthless competition, and violence against life, These are, in fact, indicators of serious individual and social dysfunction. The economy's assault against Earth's capacity to support life and its drive to grow the gap between rich and poor indicates terminal system failure. The purpose of human institutions, whether business, government, or civil society, is to provide all people with the opportunity to make a healthy, meaningful living in a balanced, co-productive relationship with Earth's community of life. Corporations that seek to monopolize resources and decision-making power in the pursuit of purely financial ends, unburdened by the exercise of human conscience, have no place in a healthy society. Human institutions are human creations. That which we humans create, we humans can change. Environmental sustainability, economic justice, and a living democracy are all inseparable from one another. Either we have all of them or we have none of them. So this sacred life and living Earth story provides a framing vision for a living economy that is rooted in community, works with nature, meets the needs of all, and gives every person a voice in the decisions in which their well-being and that of the whole depend. Of course, what we have been discussing in every session in this conference. Now, generally, the shared story, or the shared sacred story of any people aligns with their underlying cosmology or creation story. Their deepest beliefs about the origin and nature of the universe. That we in modern society lack such a shared and currently credible cosmology goes a long way toward explaining why we have been so easily seduced by the sacred money and market story. At their core, the issues are deeply spiritual, which is a theme we seldom discuss within our circles. The issues have roots and are answers to the most basic of questions. From where have we come, and why? What is the nature of the universe that gave birth to Earth and in turn gave birth to us? And for what purpose were we born? Each of our three most familiar cosmologies, the distant patriarch, the grand machine, and the mystical unity, suggest quite different answers to these foundational questions. According to the conventional teachings of the Abrahamic religions, we are the creations of a distant patriarch, an all-powerful, all-knowing God who lives in a far place called heaven and rewards our obedience with a place by his side in the afterlife. Within this frame, whatever exists is by his will. And by a currently popular distortion, God wants us to be rich. He rewards his favored with wealth and power. So get with the program, go for the money. By the conventional teaching of science, a science that remains stuck in the frame of an old and outdated cosmology, we are the product of a grand machine universe. A universe akin to a big clock playing out its destiny as its mighty spring unwinds. Now, by this story, life is merely an accidental outcome of material complexity and has no purpose or meaning. Consciousness is an artifact of physical processes in the brain. Free will is an illusion. Wow, that's depressing. I think I'll go shopping. I'm not just laughing. That, in fact, is where we are turned. If you're depressed, go shopping, which will be a distraction. You'll feel fine. In the classic expression of the mystical unity story, what we experience as material reality, including our experience of ourselves as material beings, is actually an illusion generated by the human ego. An illusion that separates us from the reality of the eternal one. Now, this cosmology is a source of profound insights. We are indeed all interconnected. Indeed, the harm we do to others, we do as well to ourselves. And the illusion of separation is a source of suffering and violence. Now, typically, the practitioners of mystical unity teach that the path to ending violence is through individual meditative practice to suppress and transcend the individual ego. They neither mention nor offer us guidance, however, in dealing with the violence of rogue institutions that operate beyond human control. Now, the sacred life and living earth story that frames a new economics for a healthy living earth builds on the foundations of a less familiar cosmology. Call it a living earth cosmology, or call it a living universe cosmology. It draws insights from all the other foundational cosmologies. It embraces the findings of science, but observes that as described by science, the unfolding universe bears no resemblance whatever to a clock winding down. Rather, it resembles more a living seed bursting forth to grow into a magnificent flowering tree, growing toward ever greater complexity, beauty, awareness, and possibility. That is not what machines do. Drawing from the insights of indigenous peoples, religion, and the mystics, the living universe cosmology embraces a view that all of creation is the manifestation of a conscious spiritual intelligence seeking to know itself through a creative journey of self-discovery as it unfolds toward ever greater complexity, beauty, awareness, and possibility. And by this reckoning, all beings, stars, energy particles, star systems, planets, humans, animals, plants, rocks, rivers, are both expression and agent of the Spirit, each with its place and purpose in a process that reveals an extraordinary capacity for intelligent, purposeful self-organization at all system levels. Within this frame, the human ego is not the result of some great cosmic blunder. It is, in fact, essential to our participation in the most epic of all journeys of self-discovery. But we need to learn to own and direct our ego to the service of the whole. Now, according to science, some 13.8 billion years ago, a giant energy cloud burst forth in a blinding flash. You all know this story, but play it through in terms of deepening our sense of who we are. What is the deeper reality of which we are a part? And what may this tell us about our deeper purpose and reason for being? Now, as this energy cloud burst forth, by fortunate coincidence, it had exactly the right physical constants to form into quantum particles that formed into complex atoms that formed into complex molecules. And with the passing of time, these molecules formed into trillions of burning stars, each comprising an unimaginably vast number of quantum particles, atoms, and molecules in constant, often violent and chaotic interaction. These stars produced and threw off substances we experience as stable solid matter, and yet quantum physics tells us it is mostly empty space occupied by constantly moving, appearing, and disappearing waves and particles. Many trillions of stars birthed and provided a sustained energy source for the planets that circle them. And at least one of these trillions of planets possessed exactly the right conditions for the emergence of simple organisms with an ability to co-evolve into ever more complex organisms. And this next part is absolutely foundational. In the earliest stages of Earth's evolutionary journey, these microscopic single-cell organisms worked with the forces of Earth's geological processes to transform every aspect of Earth's crust, waters, and atmosphere to create and maintain conditions distinctive to planet Earth and essential to the emergence of more complex life forms like humans. Wow. I'm not depressed anymore. This is pretty exciting. These organisms transformed and stabilized chemical composition of the planet's atmosphere, lowered the planet's temperature, and concentrated and sequestered a vast variety of chemical compounds, including toxins and excess carbon, deep underground. They created weather systems that provide the planet's landmass with continually renewing supplies of fresh water and oxygen-rich air. This extraordinary self-organizing system now continuously regenerates Earth's soils, rivers, aquifers, fisheries, forests, grasslands, and much more to sustain the life of the whole. All the while, this wondrous self-organizing community maintains a climatic balance, temperature, and chemical composition of Earth's oceans, landmass, and atmosphere, wholly unlike the conditions on any of Earth's planetary neighbors or any other planet of which we have any knowledge. Decision-making within this system is everywhere local, the outcome of countless trillions of individual choice-making living organisms. Whew. Now, the idea that this miracle is solely the outcome of a combination of mechanics and purposeless choice defies logic, common sense, and the foundational principles of Newtonian mechanics. Again, it is not what machines do. And for all our scientific understanding, we still have pitifully little understanding of how it all works, because the non-indigenous cosmologies of modern science condition us to think of Earth as more like a machine than like an intelligent living organism maintaining the conditions essential to life. So we give very little attention to studying it as a living system. And that allows us to move forward, to create and serve an economy that aggressively extracts and releases sequestered carbons and toxins back out into Earth's atmospheres, waters, and soils to suppress the natural processes by which living Earth maintains the conditions essential to our own existence. And we think we're an intelligent species. And to what purpose do we do this? To make money, which exists only as numbers on a computer hard drive, and we make it for people who already have more money than they can possibly use. Now, meanwhile, economists and technophiles living in a science fiction dream world suggest that with enough money and technology, we have no need of nature. We can create vast desalination plants to meet our needs for fresh water. We can meet our energy needs with fracking and nuclear reactors and replace living trees with mechanical trees, etc., etc. It is perhaps the most fundamental fact of our existence that without a healthy living Earth, there will be no humans. Without humans, there will be no money and no corporations. The logic would seem clear. The right and responsibility of humans to secure the rights and well-being of nature is the most fundamental of all human rights and responsibilities. That is a responsibility of our time. The work of our time is to learn to live with appropriate humility and alignment with the structures and processes of living Earth. This requires that we replace a money-centered suicide economy with a life-centered living economy that restores and maintains the health of our living Earth Mother, equitably meets the needs of all people, and supports radical democracy. Now, as we think about what this means in structural terms, there are two critical variables. One is values, and the other is power. What do we most value? Money or life? Well, if we most value money, obviously we design our institutions to assure that money resides with financial markets, and preferably with financial markets run by computers programmed to seek nothing but instant financial returns in total disregard of life. But we've accomplished that with great genius. But most of us are here because we believe our framing value should be life. Well, if we want life to be our framing value, then we need to connect power with life. We need to arrange our institutions, replace the institutions of the idolatrous, money-worshiping economy with institutions that root power in people living in living communities in a balanced, co-productive relationship with nature. And so that's much of what we've been talking about here. How do you do that? Now, I'm going to kind of quickly summarize the rest of the key points in my presentation because we are already over time. What that means is creating an economy that is grounded in local ownership, and not just by a few people, but the participation. If private property is such a good thing, which I do believe it is, we should all have some. And the basic frame, which comes out of Adam Smith, out of Thomas Jefferson, is that basically we should each own the means of producing our own livelihood. So all these discussions about cooperative ownership are about establishing that kind of frame, and it requires a huge redistribution of power. If we are to organize as life organizes, diversity is the key to the resilience of life. So we must organize in diverse communities that bring together the variety of our cultural traditions, which are our way of understanding the range of our human possibilities, all of which we must choose between those of our human possibilities that serve life versus those that are self-destructive. This is the most extraordinary nature of true free will. I think of us humans as creation's most daring experiment in the possibilities of free will, of a self-aware consciousness. Because when we get it right, we can do extraordinary things to move ahead this creative journey, but when we get it wrong, we get it terribly wrong, and we can end up becoming another failed evolutionary experience. One key, is all the diverse initiatives that we are engaged in potentially come under the umbrella of our larger story. And if we are to succeed in our larger goal and our larger vision, we must ultimately replace this sacred money and market story with a sacred life and living earth story. And whatever our activities, whatever our initiative, we need to begin to frame it within a living earth frame. We need to bring this story forward in our work, in our speech, in every engagement. And it's not changing our priorities, it's not doing different things. All the things we're doing here are necessary, but how do we talk about them? How do we learn to begin to speak the language of the sacred? The language of our true values and our true nature. And do it with confidence. See, here's part of what I've learned. Out of countless conversations with people of countless origins, religions, races, cultures, there is almost universally this common element when we're expressing truly from the heart. But since we individually do not hear this story in the culture, we do not hear it in the public discourse, if I feel that story, I think, well, there must be something strange about me because I seem to be different. Nobody else gets it. So I don't dare speak it. But if we begin to break through the fear, we begin to speak it, suddenly we begin to realize, oh, I'm not alone. In fact, most everyone shares the story. If we bring that story forward, we can reframe our sense of our own identity, and we can reframe our society and our institutions accordingly. So in closing, let me say again, we are living beings born of a living earth who live by our story, our shared story. The story is the key. Our future is ours to choose. Change the story, change the future. We're the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you.